Brooklyn.
Hope you're feeling good for a Wednesday. My name is Byron Cobalt from byron-cobalt.com and a featured writer for FantasyPros. This is it. My hands are probably large. We've reached the end of the 2023 everything, really. Most specifically, the end of the 2023 fantasy football season. It's time to hand out fantasy football awards. Now, this is the Fantasy Games 1 show, but Fantasy Games 1 is also a metric that converts fantasy points into Fantasy Games 1 for your fantasy team. So as you might imagine, that metric weighs heavily into the awards as I'm going to hand them out. The whole idea behind fantasy football, it's not just to score fantasy points, it's to win fantasy matchups.
Yep.
And the players who win you the most matchups over the course of a season and lose you the least are the most likely to be valuable for your team.
Yep.
Fantasy football MVP should be the player that gets the most Fantasy Games 1, right?
That makes sense to me.
Kind of.
It's not my wallet.
In addition to Fantasy Games 1, we have another metric we need to introduce to do the awards, and it's called Fantasy Championships 1. What this does is it takes Fantasy Games 1 and converts it again. Whereas Fantasy Games 1 are more important than fantasy points, the point isn't just to win the game, the point is to win the championship. So Fantasy Championships 1 are your chances of winning the championship. So we're now going to convert Fantasy Games 1 into Fantasy Championships 1. How are we going to do that? Well, if you want any more detail on how these metrics are calculated, you can refer back to the video from the beginning of the season that talks about Fantasy Games 1. That's a good primer for this. There's really a 3-step calculation for Fantasy Championships 1. The first step is take the draft slot adjusted Fantasy Games 1 number for the regular season. I call the regular season at the end of week 15. Why week 14? Not only do some leagues have different playoff rules, but some teams have buys, obviously, in week 15. I go into this a little bit more on my blog this week. I'm not going to use up video space here. We're going to get to the awards faster, but if you want a better explanation on why it's acceptable to consider the first round of the playoffs to be part of the regular season, go check out my blog at byron-cobalt.com. The link to that post is going to be in the description of this video. Your draft-adjusted Fantasy Games 1 number from the regular season. You convert it into your chances of making the playoffs. The higher your number, the more likely it is that your team say won 8 or 9 or 10 games in the regular season, which is what you really need to make the playoffs. If you won 7 games, you're pretty much not making the fantasy playoffs, barring something really extreme. From there, you then take your Fantasy Games 1 score from the semifinals in week 16, convert that into your chances of advancing, and then do that again for the Fantasy Championship to find out the chances you've now not only made the semis, but then made the finals and then won it. Absent better data, the expected opponent scores for each round of the playoffs, leaving it about the same as what you'd see in the regular season. Playoffs tend to be an interesting time, even though you're in theory dealing with better fantasy opponents. That's the calculation. So without further ado, here are your Fantasy Games 1 Fantasy Awards for 2023.
Are you ready for your first day at goodness school?
We have 7 awards we're going to go through today. Playoffs?
Playoffs?
Most valuable player and least valuable player.
Playoffs?
The regular season most valuable player and least valuable player. The player with the maximum return on investment, so it's like best value. The player with the biggest disappearance of investment, which means they burned up the most of your draft capital. And the wasted value award for the player that has scored the most points that you probably didn't take advantage of because he was on your bench all year. The first award, the playoff MVP. The silver Davante Adams apple, which I've renamed now to the Davante Adams apple pie, is CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb finished the regular season as the 4th best player by draft-adjusted Fantasy Games 1, giving you about a 47% chance of making the semifinals. Then he's performed so well in the playoffs, gave you a 32% chance of making the finals, and then was the best player in fantasy in the championship week, giving you a 27.6% chance of winning your fantasy championship. If you had the CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott stack, we've been talking about that one all year, the plane has successfully landed.
I just want to tell you both, good luck. We're all counting on you.
Dak wasn't terrible in the semis, and finally, it wasn't great in the semis, but he was okay in the finals, so you were able to take advantage of CeeDee Lamb here. So congratulations, CeeDee Lamb, drafters, and those who traded for him gave you a 27% chance of winning the championship the year, which is the best of all players. The next best was Kyren Williams at about 20%. So there's actually a pretty big gap here. He had almost a 7% advantage on Kyren Williams in second place. Amon-Ra St. Brown with a strong playoffs was in third. Puka Nacua with a very strong playoffs in fourth, believe it or not. And Christian McCaffrey was in fifth. We're going to talk about Christian McCaffrey a little bit more today, as you might imagine. Fantasy playoffs least valuable player. The Justin Herbert empty gas tank goes to Justin Herbert's teammate, Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler gave you only a 15% chance of making the semis because of his weak regular season. Then didn't do much better in the playoffs with a 5.6 chance of bringing you to the finals and only a 1.47% chance of actually winning your fantasy championship if you had Austin Eckler. He had the second lowest fantasy games won in championship week. He was only out unscored by Amari Cooper, who didn't play, but was stayed in a lot of fantasy lineups because he was declared inactive kind of late on Thursday. This is actually Austin Eckler's second Kobe Award, as he won playoff MVP last year, 2022. Oh, how the tables have turned. He barely beat out Tony Pollard for the playoff least valuable player award. Tony Pollard, who I was waiting all year to do the Theoden meme where he's just like the Tony Pollard managers just came back to life, but that kind of happened and then didn't really happen. You didn't have that. The arc didn't follow Theoden well enough to really justify that. Your regular season fantasy football MVP is, to the surprise of nobody, Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey was in a battle with Tyreek Hill for most of the season, but then in the last week of the regular season, / the first week of the playoffs, removed all doubt. Led the league with 2.62 fantasy games won. That's 0.4 better than Travis Kelce had last year as the MVP. It's not as good as Cooper Kupp's 2021. Cooper Kupp had 2.77 in 2021, so he didn't quite have the best regular season of the 2020s. I don't have 2020 data, so it's the last 3 years is really all we're comparing. But he easily wins the MVP. So congratulations to Christian McCaffrey winning the Cooper Kupp Golden Barrel. The award is named after Cooper Kupp because he won the first one. The regular season least valuable player, also to the surprise of very little, will be Najee Harris. Najee Harris giving you -1 fantasy games won this season compared to an average fantasy player. Najee won by such a wide margin, there wasn't even a competition. It was close during the season, but Najee finished the season with a bunch of bad weeks, and the next closest was Dameon Pierce at -0.72 fantasy games won. So Najee Harris, head and shoulders below anyone else, and winner of the Tom Brady wedding ring for least valuable player. For the maximum return on investment award, a few stipulations here. Christian McCaffrey and Tyreek Hill are ineligible for this award because they were first-round picks, and CeeDee Lamb's ineligible because, well, he was almost a first-round pick, and they kind of have an unwritten rule where you can't win 2 Kobe awards in the same year. The winner of maximum return on investment is Kyren Williams. And we will rename this award. The award was the Plate of Jonathan Taylor Promise. I never really loved that award name, even though it's based on Jonathan Taylor Thomas, which I thought was kind of clever. We're going to rename the award the Kyren Williams Red Lightsaber because Kylo Ren made his appearance here. Kyren also had a great playoffs. Again, was second in the running for playoff MVP. Breakout season for the Rams running back. Certainly a first-round pick next year. Not a lot of people saw this season coming. Great return on investment as a player that was drafted outside of the first 10 rounds of most fantasy drafts, or an ADP outside of the top 120 players. Maximum Disappearance of Investment Award. This is the Allen Robinson Bear Pelt. Goes to Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow actually narrowly outscored Nick Chubb for this award, because Nick Chubb got hurt, and this is disappearance of investment, so you basically had to replace your first-round pick Nick Chubb with a replacement running back. Joe Burrow, you had to do the same, but before he got injured, he was even worse than a replacement player because of all the bad weeks that he had. So Joe Burrow was not quite passed by Nick Chubb, despite the fact that once they got hurt, Nick Chubb was more of a drain on your team because he was drafted more highly. The Joe Burrow impact still eked him out. So that was -1.79 wins against draft expectations for Joe Burrow compared to 1.77 for Nick Chubb. I would have felt bad if it was Nick Chubb too. Joe Burrow kind of earned this award. And our final award, the Wasted Value Award. This award is unique because measuring fantasy games won using percent started is uniquely set up to find who these players are. The winner of the 2023 Wasted Value Award is Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet narrowly beating out Gabe Davis and Devin Achane. Devin Achane, who had 50 points on your bench, so he got a lot of his bench value all in 1 week. Gabe Davis was one of the most the biggest examples of a week where just when no one started him, he went off. Cole Kmet beat all of them to have the most value on your bench this year. The average fantasy manager, only started Cole Kmet 4 times this year, and he had 139 points from the tight end slot. Cole Kmet also had one of the highest benched fantasy games 1 scores of the season when he scored 24 points in week 4, 0% started. So Cole Kmet, now we're going to name this award after him. Jared Goff kind of won it last year. Kirk Cousins, the award wasn't a thing, but he would have won it in 2021. So we're going to name it after Cole Kmet, the Cole Kmet Sandworm, because Kmet is actually a promotional character for the board game Kmet. Fun fact about how crazy this year was. Back in 2021, 5 players had a benched fantasy games 1 score of at least 0.5. 2022, 9 players did. 2023, 22 players had a benched fantasy games 1 score of 0.5 or above. It means there's a lot of value, a lot of players going off on your bench this year, even compared to the last 2 years. So I hope you did well this crazy fantasy football season. I hope at the very least you had fun. Most leagues that you're playing, you're not going to win. You can't go into fantasy football expecting to win everything, but hopefully you won at least something. If you want to relive the 2023 fantasy season, I've put together a 2023 Fantasy Games 1 video highlight reel, so feel free to check that out. If you enjoyed this video, hope you'd like and subscribe. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the off season. We've got a few videos going over the off season, and I'll see you in 2024. Well, it's already 2024, and I'll see you on another Wednesday.